Muito bom dia, sejam todos bem-vindos ao segundo dia do segundo Congresso Internacional de Controle e Políticas Públicas, uma realização do Instituto Rui Barbosa com a colaboração do Tribunal de Contas do Estado de São Paulo. Conta com os seguintes patrocínios: Companhia Brasileira de Metalurgia e Mineração, CBMM, Companhia Energética de Minas Gerais, CEMIG, Companhia de Desenvolvimento Econômico de Minas Gerais, CODEMIG, Governo do Estado de Minas Gerais. E os apoios da Associação Brasileira dos Tribunais de Contas dos Municípios, ABRACON, Associação Nacional dos Ministros e Conselheiros Substitutos dos Tribunais de Contas, AUDICOM, Associação dos Membros dos Tribunais de Contas do Brasil, ATRICOM, Cátedra Jean Monnet, da Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, Editora Fórum, Universidade de Itaúna, Tribunal de Contas do Estado de Minas Gerais, Tribunal de Contas da União, Fundação Instituto de Pesquisas Econômicas, FIP, e Faculdade de Direito da Universidade de São Paulo. Colaborador institucional, Uninove. A conferência desta manhã fala sobre a efetividade de políticas públicas e cidadania, o papel da gestão. Eu gostaria de pedir a todos a gentileza para que mantivessem seus celulares desligados ou no modo silencioso. Para presidir a conferência desta manhã, convidamos o excelentíssimo senhor conselheiro Carlos Thompson Costa Fernandes, presidente do Tribunal de Contas do Rio Grande do Norte. E para falar sobre o tema, convidamos o senhor Michael Barzelay, PhD em Ciências Políticas e mestre em Gerenciamento Público e Privado pela Yale University, AB pela Stanford University, professor doutor de Gestão Pública da London School of Economics and Political Sciences. É amplamente conhecido por seu livro Breaking Through Bureaucracy, A New Vision for Managing in Government. Nos últimos anos, tem desenvolvido uma abordagem para a pesquisa em administração pública que seja consistente com as novas realidades, aproximando o campo da gestão para tornar-se mais de uma ciência construída. Com a palavra, o presidente da mesa, Carlos Thompson.
Bom dia a todos e a todas. É com imensa satisfação que eu recebi o convite do presidente Elvésio, presidente do Instituto Rui Barbosa, para presidir essa mesa, e aproveito a oportunidade para agradecer o convite e também parabenizá-lo pela organização do evento, juntamente com o presidente do TCE de São Paulo, conselheiro Dimas Ramalho, enaltecendo, sobretudo, a atuação do Tribunal de Contas do Estado de São Paulo e também do IRB, na apresentação do IGM, um produto extremamente importante que vem auxiliar os municípios brasileiros e também os próprios tribunais de contas no tema que hoje iremos tratar aqui, que é de gestão pública, o papel da gestão. Sem maiores delongas, eu dou as boas-vindas ao professor Michael e passo a palavra ao senhor.
Bom dia a todos. Thank you very much for the introduction, Mr. Thompson. Unfortunately, I will have to speak to you in English today. My Portuguese is a little bit rusty, I'm afraid. Though empecé a falar português em 1978. My experience in preparing for this event is to notice that there is a great potential for mutual understanding between those interested in your fields, including law in some cases, and finance in other cases, and accounting in other cases, and my field, which, as was explained in the introduction, is called public management. And there are different ways to think about public management. Some people think of it as public management, and other people think of it as public management. And I'm of the latter sort. in that I consider public management an extension of the study of management, general management, into the public sector. So I'm interested in management in government, and it's simply better to call that public management. In accord with that, my presentation is not yet up. If we could go to that. There we go. Very good. In accord with that, I'd like to suggest that the general concept of today's session is to start a conversation. Now, I hope I'm not plagiarizing LinkedIn too much in using that particular expression. And fortunately, I can't see. And the conversation began. Is it possible to get a monitor of what actually is up there? Because that would help me quite a lot. There we go. Thank you very much. In fact, I began an early conversation with Sebastian Helvético earlier, and it was even up on the website of the Institute some time ago. You never know when you're going to be recorded and put on display. And I think it was apparent to me from that there was a good need for a conversation, but in some sense there needed to be a pre-conversation, anterior conversation, in order for us to know the background, intellectual background of each other's orientation to the subject of both governance and management in government. And so the essence of my presentation today is to conduct that, or to prepare the ground for a serious conversation by filling in some of the theoretical and conceptual background about public management, taken as a field of study, interested in practice, but a field of study nevertheless. Okay? And so I'm going to sort of take you through some basic concepts and also an idea, which I call here an idealization of public management as a field of study. And I would suppose I'll just pick a little point here to say when I'm teaching my students, I always like to teach them how to have a good meeting. And I tell them that the essence of a good meeting is to know what the outcome is that you're looking for from the meeting outcome. And so there's a simple meeting outcome here, and that is I would like you to watch my videos. Because for the first time ever, I took my subject and drafted scripted videos going over the very ground that I'm about to talk to today. So if you consider this entire next 45 minutes as a long trailer for videos. That is to say, if you like today's performance, you'll probably like the videos better. And you can watch them in the comfort of your own living room. So one way to get started with this is to see that there are kind of different idealizations of different aspects of public management out and about in the academic world and in the professional world. And although there's some overlap in the terminology and the concepts in the idealizations, that doesn't mean that they all are saying the same thing. They may be saying quite different things. And so from here, just to illustrate this point, I've downloaded what are known in English as word clouds. I hope that the concept translates into Portuguese with nuvens de palavras. Certainly it does literally. And here's what you get if you do a web search on public administration. You get a fair number of familiar words, and just by looking at it, you can imagine how they relate to each other. It's a coherent system of concepts. And you could do that as well in a more specialized area of interest to many of you, control and auditing. All you need to do is look at the rows of this on the front face of the cube, and you will see that these are all important functions of control within an organization, within a government, and within the various ventures that are taking place in both contexts. And you can understand the difference between soft controls and hard controls, and those all make sense as soft controls and hard controls. It is a coherent idea. Okay? Now, I'd like to take you into my world of public management, which is not a coherent idea. Here, what I've provided is a number of images that you can find on the internet if you search for public management. In fact, if you look at the images, the word clouds on this sort of composite of images from the net, you will find that the word public management itself doesn't even appear. Okay? So you search for images on public management, and essentially you can't find one. The second slide is a good example of the same point. I actually finally found one where the enlarged words are public and management. You can find it down there on the bottom center. And the other place where the words come up together, public management, is in the cover of one of my books, which was very pleasing to see. So I'd like to introduce you to my field, but my field doesn't know how to introduce itself. So I'd like to make a proper introduction of my field to you today. Okay? And in order to do that, I'm going to have to put my own spin on what is this field. I'm going to give you my personal version of what is this field. And here it is. I call it not a definition, I call it an idealization because it would be nice if it were like this. And also, like any idealization, I'm putting things in a very positive, warm, glowing light as opposed to the light that it would have if we took it on face value. This is the structure of the overall presentation. I'm going to kind of dive into particular concepts so that you're familiar with it. I have to say that none of the items represented by an individual bubble on this diagram is original. You wouldn't want it to be original if you wanted people to accept it. And I'm also minded of my current working experience with the Escola Nacional de Administração Pública in Brasilia, where some of the nice young people say, every time I open my mouth and say anything, she knows that there are 10 books behind it. So, in a kind of very quickly, I consider public management to be a field of study about a professional practice, about a variety of professional practice, one of the bubbles. And that raises the question of what sort of variety is this, okay? And the variety has to do with its domain, okay? In business management, the domain is business, and company, like entreprise as it was in French, emprendimiento as it is in Spanish, emprendimento as it is in Portuguese, and in public sector, it's an analog to that, and I'll be speaking to what the analog is. But we have a variety of professional practice. It's about management, but a management in a special context. And as professional practice, it has some attributes that are true of any professional practice, properly understood. And some theorists in the pragmatist tradition, American pragmatist tradition, have said that professional practice is fundamentally or essentially about problem solving. And problem solving, it sounds good, but we also have to know what it means. And the middle lower bubble says it's about converting existing into preferred conditions, making things better. Actually, I think it should say it's converting existing present conditions into preferred future conditions, not just imagining that the you can get from one state to the other without going through a little bit of history along the way. But in shorthand, converting existing into preferred conditions. Now, another aspect of professional practice is that you ought to have some reason for making an argument as to what is a problem, and in particular, some reason to say that what you would like to see happen is a solution for the problem. And many of us would say that it would take some kind of knowing, maybe even knowledge, to base your decisions as to what problems to undertake and what solutions to pursue. And so that leads us to the upper right-hand bubble about understanding how things operate and develop. Well, it's important to understand it, but there's many ways to understand things. The way most people understand how things operate and develop is from their personal experience. It's a very convincing personal experience. The only problem is that it's a bit myopic and isn't well formulated to travel well from situation to situation, so it's reasonable to supplement personal experience with generalities or theories that have been worked out and with other people's systematic accounts of other experiences. So whatever the source, it has a role to play in problem solving, complementing individual experience. So I'll sort of not go into every bubble here because I want to hold you in suspense as to the significance of every item, but to summarize, public management is an area of professional practice, a variety of professional practice. It's particularly directed at some aspects of the public sector, in particular those aspects that you can think of as being like a venture, in that it does something like a public program, deliver a public program, and it exists as something like a government organization. And it is professional as a professional practice because there's some expectation that the practitioners will know something about the domain, and they will be skilled at taking what is known about the domain and utilizing it thoughtfully when they are solving a problem. That's public management. Now, there's a lot of detail behind that. You can do deep dives, and here's one dive is to go back into the traditions of the field on which we draw and try to recall these interesting concepts and fit them into this conception. And here are a bunch of those concepts that fall under the broad heading of administration. And it may come as a surprise to you, but in my part of the world, people don't use the term administration anymore. In fact, they don't really teach administration much anymore. I had the nice pleasure to go back to my former university in the last spring, Yale University at the School of Management, from which I also have a degree, I'm sorry to say, already 35 years ago. And I was explaining to my colleagues what I was teaching there about public management, and the comment was, "Oh, that's very interesting. You teach people how to get things done in an organization." And it was interesting because they discovered that they don't actually teach that in business school anymore. And I commented on this to one of my colleagues, and he observed that one of the consequences of students actually not being taught how to get things done in an actual bureaucratic organization is they leave business school thinking that they will be successful on the basis of two things. One is their authority, and the other is their charm. And he says the problem is, within a few months of being out there, they'll discover they have too little of each. Thought that was really worth taking home with me. Business school students can't read an organization chart and know what it means to be line or staff or anything else. So we have to, probably in this part of the world you still do that, thankfully, but we have to play a funny kind of catch-up. So when I teach this, I also tell the students about the history of thought about one aspect of administration, the aspect of administration that has to do with the structuring of organizations, with what I call administrative organization, on the grounds that administrative organization is clearly one attribute of any public program and organization like venture in the public sector. And the history is actually quite interesting, and particularly if you go back and look at the original writer on this subject, Frenchman, actually a Turk become Frenchman, it's hard to do that these days, named Henri Fayol. I don't know, I always ask the question when I introduce him, who has heard of Henri Fayol? And then I ask people to put up their hands, and I think I can see everybody. That's pretty good. That's about 12%. And when I ask my students if they know about Henri Fayol, I get none. Although when I explain who he was, the French students always smile as being proud. And the only time I've gotten 85% of the hands going up is when I did a little course for members of the organization department of the Chinese Communist Party. They know their Fayol well. Well, many of you will know about the modern people who came up with ideas about administrative organization and bequeathed the notion of planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting as a paradigm for public administration. And if you don't know about that, you can watch the video. I think in terms of remembering something about Fayol, I think it's really important because he was the person that started off defining those words, but he put it in a broader context. And the broader context was that any entreprise, as he called it, had to do 6 things. I wonder how many of you know what the 6 things were. Now, there's a hint, right? Administration is one of them, okay? But it's only one. We're still got 5 to go, right? And I'll just list them off. They're up here one place or the other. The ones that, you will find easy to identify with, I think, are finance function, accounting function, and security function. It was kind of interesting. I actually came across a nice short version of this a year ago, and I was interested to see security function. So cybersecurity. Actually, it was all about people not stealing from the venture. So that was put down from the beginning as a very important management function of any venture, not the same thing as administration, and worth knowing. So the origins of many of what you're interested in is from there. And then there's the technical and commercial functions, which really have to do with how the venture gets along in the world, does something that creates value for its customers or other stakeholders. So very good to know the history of thought of this. Now, the business about planning, controlling, budgeting, coordinating, directing, those are elements within administration as it was defined. And it's very important to talk about those things, but in the context of understanding that administration and security and all those other things are partly there to support, to enable the primary functions of, in that context, technical and commercial. And if you pursue functions like security and accounting and finance and administration to the detriment of technical and commercial, you will probably not have a successful business over the long run. Okay? And those kind of tensions between possibly competing goals are ones I think everyone in this room is aware of, and this may just be a way to put your finger precisely on what that means in historical intellectual terms. Okay, let me move forward to one of the things that's distinctive about entreprise. I'm just going to go through this quickly, get to the next slide. There we go. One of the distinctive things about entreprise in the public sector is that what is the analog to business is usually called the program. And program relates to policy. So, a business is a commercial operation is successful because of its business. A government or public sector venture is successful in part because of the programs that it delivers, not just the characteristics of the program as a plan, but the characteristics of a program as an operational system. And so it's probably good to just go to the background of this idea. If one of the books that is quite helpful here is Foundations of Policy Analysis by Brewer and DeLeon. They're disciples of Harold Lasswell, a Yale Law School professor in the 50s. And I looked for what they had to say about programs, and I found it in footnote 54. That's the only place I found it. And it is essentially, the idea is that programs are ways of implementing policy. They're constituent elements of policy. And they then say that they're going to go on and talk about it, but actually they don't. So we're going to have to supplement that with maybe some other ideas about programs. You know, a very popular idea for talking about programs, I'm sure you've all come across, is the results chain. Cadeia de resultados is how it gets translated. And this is in the greatest hits of all characterizations of programs. And I think one of the ideas is that the impact of a program will create public value. If you want to relate value chain concept to one of the important concepts in the literature on public management for Mark Moore, public value. And I think, you know, it's worthwhile thinking of the chain as having an upstream stage and a downstream stage. And one important aspect of the chain is the relationship between the inputs, the activities, and the outputs. And one way to think about that relationship is they come to occur, the outputs come to occur as the result of the planning and then the operation of something like a technological system, although clearly in human beings are parts, in some sense, of that technological system. It's not just a list of things that are inputs. It's not just a list of things that are activities. It's not just a list of things that are outputs. There's some causal process through which the outputs come about as the result of the existence of the activities and the existence of the inputs. And the best way to think about that is some kind of technological system at work. And that may seem like the most obvious thing, but for me, teaching students who have been drinking the Kool-Aid of economics and don't have any engineering background, they can't actually describe anything like a technological system without being asked to do so 6 times, like you're telling your kids to do their homework, and then tell them they're not going to get a good grade unless they prove they can actually characterize with a certain amount of detail and the operation of a technological system. And I think this is, also characteristic of some accountants, unless they have really gone deeply into activity-based costing kinds of approaches. So just a warning. And then there's a little deceit thing that happens with the results chain that you have to be aware of, and that is that the relationship between outputs and outcome is not really that, a technological system producing some kind of further effect. It's a movement to a completely different system. Outcomes are in a different system than outputs. So it's like the stream going into the lake, okay? Outputs are the stream. Outcomes are in the lake. They do relate because the stream goes into the lake, but they're different systems. And you're not warned to think that you're changing entirely the way you think about the relationship between elements of a results chain if you're not made aware of the relationship between stream and system. And then there's another problem with the results chain for us in public management, and that is the question, where is the management in this? Okay? Well, it's not there. Why isn't it there? Because if you think back to Fayol, all that's there is the technical and commercial activity. Everything else is missing. Okay? So this is great for the people who like to study programs and think administration and management is beneath them, but it's not particularly good as a way into the discussion of public management, except for the fact that if you're not talking about programs, you're not talking about how public value gets created, just like if you're not if you're talking about venture and you don't spend any time talking about the technical and commercial activities or functions, you're not really talking about the basis of success in those ventures. So it's a kind of okay. You get 50 points out of 100 if you're trying to say this is what is going on in a public venture. So we got to build on that. And the way I suggest that I'm going to skip this, build on that is to, but if you want to think more about programs, just go to the dictionary and analyze it. Oh yes, what happened? I missed a slide. I didn't. Just check on time. Moving, I think I need to speed up. If you're thinking that you want to easily refer to the notion of a public program so you don't miss it, one way to do that is write down all the words that you think are important to the idea of a program. That's the fancy name for that is the frame ontology. And only an academic could say something like frame ontology and get away with it, right? And then there's a bunch of statements that characterize the concept, which are known as the frame knowledge. Those are more interesting, and I think you could see that there's a pretty standard idea about programs, and if we hold it in our mind and come back to it repeatedly, it would be quite helpful. Right. So I want to move on now to a general picture I have of what I call public ventures. And I think you'll be able to see now how this argument builds. Okay? So earlier on, at the outset, I said public management is a variety of professional practice, directed at something that you can discriminate from business and companies, right? But I didn't use a word to sort of say what it is it's directed at. And I've been saying, well, it's directed at public programs, at government organizations. Actually, it's the relationship between the two because the organizations on its own don't create public value, and the programs on their own don't get done. So we have to talk about the programs in relation to the organization, right? Okay, but we don't have a concept for that. We don't have well, I think we almost have a concept. Mark Moore almost gave us a concept for that, but we actually don't have a word for public program and government organization-like ventures over time. But now that's kind of a long expression. Nobody's going to remember it. So I think I better densify it, right? Make it more compact. And the word I use is public venture. It only refers to this long string of words that represent a complex concept. But it's a shorthand expression, and I think if we don't think that there are public ventures in the public sector, then we're never going to think about managing in government. Okay? If you want to think about managing in government, you have to look at every part of the situation as made up of these ventures that have functions, all of which that need to be performed, analogous to administration, technical, commercial, security, accounting, and finance. Okay? You can talk about the public sector without talking about management, and that's fine. We'll have a party, but we won't have a serious conversation among those with public management. Okay. So that's where am I here? So if you take that idea, if you like that idea, you need to go back into depth, right? I've kind of come up to the surface. Now let's dive under the water again, and because we need an appropriate way of characterizing programs that makes room for the interests of those that like value chains, results chains, and equally brings administration in. Makes sense, right? And fortunately, there is something in the private sector literature, and has been there for 85, 95, 2005, 15, 30 years, by Michael Porter on the idea of a value chain. And I think we can find that the value chain idea, in general, offers us things that the results chain doesn't. So if you look at this very familiar iconic even image, diagrammatic image of a value chain, you can see that the results chain is the thing on the bottom there called primary activities. Okay? And what was missing is a lot of things that have to do with administration and management, which are up on top, called the support value activities. Here, the canonical version is that the support value activities involve firm infrastructure, like control systems, human resource management, technology development, and procurement. You can obviously adapt the labels, but whatever labels you use ought to make immediate sense to you as soon as you see them. As I tell my students, this is another version. I say this is the business class version. The other one was the no frills version of a value chain. And here I just would like to make the point, as I did, that the results chain relates to inbound logistics, production, outbound logistics. And I want to say that actually to make sense of this thing, we can go back to Fayol, and if we can map Fayol into this image, then we can be confident that we are living within and exploiting the long-standing intellectual, practical, professional tradition of talking about management. Okay? So just to remind you, here are these functions of management I was telling you about: technical, commercial, financial, security, accounting, and managerial, which is the term used here for administration. And technical refers to these primary activities. They also refer to, actually, I think, technology development, okay, and to procurement. I mean, those aren't administrative activities. They're technical activities that aren't involved directly in production. Okay. Commercial refers to sales and servicing. We don't need to be too concerned with that. And then these top two support value activities sort of bundle up financial, accounting, administration, and security. They're very important to the success of a public venture. I would recommend, and I'm just going to go over this very quickly because you can watch the video, that the business value chain concept is very useful to understand what public ventures do, and when you're trying to to convert existing into preferred conditions, you better change the value chain from an existing set of conditions to a set of preferred future conditions. If you don't actually work through what the difference is between the existing and preferred conditions of your value chain, you are discussing what's going on in that venture in the most superficial way. Okay? If you don't talk through the value chain, you're not talking about actually how things get done in public sector. But we ought to view the value chain in the context of an organization, because the administrative organization has all sorts of implications for who takes responsibility for what, and how decisions get made, and how coordination occurs, as the people who have studied organization design would tell you. So if you're not familiar with the idea of a business value chain, you can read Porter. Here are all the concepts. You can also watch my video. I think what you should also consider on the left-hand side, these are all concepts, particularly starting with disaggregation, configuration, linkages, technological characteristics, economic characteristics, inputs and outputs. Those are concepts of a system, and in particular, a technological system that has economic implications. Okay? And without understanding the idea of a system, you cannot make improvements in the world in public management. So you got to teach students how to think about a system. Now the problem is that a challenge for us is that here's a way to take those concepts and write down what they mean in his own framework. The point I was making a second ago in his own terms is the last one, which is disaggregating a business into value activities is inherent in describing existing present businesses and in characterizing or designing preferred future businesses. Now, for us, all you need to do is replace the term business with program, and you get an interesting idea for us, right? Just put it in a document, go to find, go to replace, put in business for the word that you're searching for, put in program for replace, hit go, and you get the relevant statement for public sector programs. If you do that systematically, you get, so what we need to do is remember what public programs are made out of. Right? Here's the idea of public programs that I developed earlier. And so what we really need is an idea that combines public programs and business value chains. Think that can be done? It can be done. Here it is, something I call the public program value chain. And it's just a conceptual blend, in a technical sense, of the two things. So we have programs are aspects of public ventures. Programs are elements of policies undertaken by government organizations. One thing we can think about programs is essentially they have a function, a proper function, as philosophers would call it, and that is to meet social needs. Another way to put the same point is to say to create public value. Those are two ways of expressing the teleology or finalidades of programs. Now, what you get out of a program in terms of the realization of its finalidades or teleology depends on, in a causal sense, how its various value activities, concept from the business value chain, are interrelated in such a way that they operate as a whole. And the way that's often expressed in systems terms is they are configured and then operate as a functioning whole. And now here's that point I read out before. In analyzing and managing strategy, it's helpful to describe existing programs in terms of their value chains and to characterize future programs in terms of their value chains as well. So if I said, what are some of the generalities about professional practice directed at that variety of ventures called public ventures, I would put that high on the list. Okay? And I'm just not sure that that is a high on the list of everyone who comes at the public sector from other directions than general management. Okay? And if you don't, I think you're toying with a system that you don't understand and that you don't have the concepts that you would need to create a better future from the present. And I think that's, if I had a single message, it would be that. Okay. So here's my idealization again. Hopefully now you're beginning to warm up to it and appreciate it. Right? So professional practice is a variety, public management is a variety of professional practice. It's directed at public ventures, which include their public programs and context, and includes the government organizations that make them happen. And when it's done well, it is done well by drawing on and utilizing what we understand about public ventures and their operation and their development, things like the concepts I've been examining throughout today's lecture. But the actual use of that knowledge is in problem solving. It's interesting in and of itself, but for our field, it's only really significant when people use the knowledge to problem solve and to convert existing into preferred conditions. In particular, I'm concerned with certain kinds of challenges for which we need to make a response, known as developmental and adaptation problems. These are ones that are ill-structured and they're painful to deal with often. Okay? I'm not talking about routine technical problems here. And there are lots of ideas about how to do that that are part of our tradition of understanding how things operate and particularly develop in the public sector. And we need a kind of long discussion of those matters if we're going to fill out this broader notion of public management. That said, let's not forget the administration part. You can talk a lot about adjusting to difficult challenges, but forget that whatever the solution comes to be, it's going to involve some amount of meeting long-standing necessities like planning and controlling and coordinating and directing and indeed auditing and control. Here's my version of this in text, which hopefully, presumably these slides will be made available on your website. and I'm just conscious of the time, so I'll just leave it at that. Here, what I've done is just substitute the idea of public programs for public ventures, so this is the canonical official slide. And likewise, I'm converting things, which is kind of generic, into public ventures over here. So the only thing you really need to take away are two things: this slide and the link from the second slide to the videos. Now, these are concepts of adaptation that will help you recognize that there's an interest in some things that go beyond keeping an existing venture going smoothly. Very important to our field. And then there's a set of concepts that I really am excited about, and this has to do with how you convert existing into preferred conditions, particularly when the situation you face doesn't tell you what the problem is, or where people's definition of the problem need critical examination. And these are ideas about designing as an approach to problem solving. And there's a number of different aspects of that, but what I emphasize in this list is that, even though you have to put your heart and soul into problem solving of those kinds of problems, even though there's no right answer to those problems, even though the outcome, even though what's done depends on how persuasive people are about problems and solutions, nevertheless, there is a role for knowing something about your subject. Okay? And the stuff that are the kinds of things I've been talking about, plus knowledge of how things have been done in the past, how conceptually similar problems have been, quote unquote, solved, at least responded to, in historical time, whether locally or at some distance. And if we actually study those things carefully, if we understand and argue about their merits as solutions to problems, if we explain how it is that those merits have been realized, and if we communicate that well to our professional colleagues, then we can truly take advantage of the fact that people have been struggling with similar issues in different times of place, and use that understanding in solving problems. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, but just knowing there's a wheel out there is not enough to solve problems. You really do have to understand the wheel system and the wheels in operation in context elsewhere if that information is going to be useful. So I recommended taking seriously the design perspective. And the way I represent this general idea then, let me move ahead. So here's the summary statement of public management. Public management is professional practice directed at public program and government-like organizations, public ventures for short, to overcome their developmentally adaptive challenges and meet their administrative necessities for the sake of creating public value. And you're maybe wondering what this prism-like image is. It's an image of a venture. Because that's a very abstract idea, we need an image, and it's even better to have a sweet image like the Toblerone bar. And the idea is at any given moment in time, these ventures have different attributes. Some attributes are public program-like, and they're kind of represented at the top. Some programs are government organization-like, they're at the bottom right. They all got to be in our consciousness as we understand the situation of interest. Administration sort of falls in between in that it's stuff you do, but a lot of it relates to making the organization work. So it's in between. And then we have to recognize and hope that there will be deliberate change paths for any given venture. That's represented in the bottom left. Okay? But the object of change, the object of these change paths is to change the programs and the organizations both. Okay? So if the change path, if history occurs in accordance with the intended change path, then at another moment in time, and that's represented by the triangle to its right, things will be different in the program and in the organization, and you'll be on to some other change path by then. And the Toblerone bar just represents that concept. Right? And because we don't have this concept of venture in our everyday working vocabulary, even in public management, I suggest looking in any situation for public ventures look for the Toblerone out there in every situation, or the 10 Toblerones in the situation, and then, down select all of this knowledge about public management as you try to problem solve, both understand the problem and do something about it. So I started off by saying, I think there needs to be a pre-conversation, a conversação anterior, between us, if the public management people and those interested in auditing and public policy are going to really learn something from each other and have a more examined view of their own thinking. That suggests, if that premise was correct, then I think there is a necessity and probably a desire, hopefully a desire, for mutual learning about all of these important matters to do with control, policy, and public management. Thank you.
Queremos agradecer ao professor Maico pelas lições valiosas, enfatizando notadamente a obrigação, o dever de todo gestor público se municiar de práticas profissionais, ou seja, ter pelo menos ao seu redor pessoas que entendam da matéria que está sendo objeto da sua pasta, do seu plano de governo, para que nós não tenhamos administrações que apostam na sorte, né? Ou seja, eu acho que o grande legado que o professor Maico nos deixa é justamente nós procurarmos ter uma gestão pública profissional. E eu fico a pensar como nós podemos empregar isso no Brasil, diante, por exemplo, do presidencialismo de coalizão, onde muitas vezes os ministérios são loteados sob a perspectiva eminentemente política, deixando um pouco de lado essa necessidade de uma gestão pública profissional. Eu agradeço ao senhor, professor, pelas lições valiosas e passo ao cerimonial.
Agradecemos ao conselheiro Carlos Thompson e convidamos para que faça a entrega de uma lembrança ao senhor Michael. Eu gostaria de lembrar a todos que nos auditórios que temos no prédio, no auditório MASP, será realizado daqui a pouquinho, iniciará o painel Políticas, Públicas e o Desafio no Orçamento Público. E no auditório Pinacoteca, o painel Objetivos do Desenvolvimento Sustentável. Esses painéis terão inícios a partir do momento que os senhores chegarem nos auditórios. Eles ainda não começaram. Em instantes, nós daremos início ao painel Políticas Públicas e Desenvolvimento Regional.